Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast. A conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our weekly podcast. Great to have you with us. So we want to welcome the congregation of Ephrata Community Church, as well as anybody else who is tuning in. Just thanks so much for joining us today. So obviously, I got a very special guest with me today, and we're going to be talking about a few things, reflecting on this past weekend's message. So this is Hannah McNevich. Now, Hannah and I have different last names, but we are actually related. So what is that relation, Hannah?
You're my dad.
Yeah, how about that? Oh, my goodness. Okay. So that's scary. And so in getting her, she highly resisted being a part of the podcast today because she's not one who likes to be speaking in front of people. So apparently we are related because I'm not necessarily a big fan of that either. So I had someone else ask her, so the request was not coming from Dad, which made it a little bit different. What are you drinking there, Hannah?
Coffee.
It smell? Is it straight coffee or?
It's caramel.
Oh boy!
Something.
See, that's not actual coffee.
There's
then.
extra stuff involved.
Yeah, that's not. I would question whether it's actual coffee if it's been tampered with. But anyhow, we won't go there.
It's
That's not
fantastic.
the topic for today.
I support my choices.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what we're here for. So this past weekend, we continued on our series on faith works, and this past weekend we considered the area of media, and I took a little bit of a different direction than what our pattern was for the past number of weeks, in that. Because of the uniqueness of the time that we live in, it seems like really everybody has a media platform, and so I just went a little bit more general this past weekend when it came to understanding how we all have a platform. We have to be careful how we use our words, and I wanted to do that because I thought it was important. But at the same time, I do want to honor those that are specifically in that sphere of media. So I've asked Hannah to join me today for a couple of reasons, and one of those is Hannah actually is a photojournalism major, that was her major. She's a graduate of Temple University. And so it is her specific field. And we were talking a little bit earlier today about some specifics around journalism. So this is going to be different from this past weekend where that was a little more like, okay, all of us have a voice, but now we do want to talk specifically about journalism and the media sphere as well. So Hannah, you were telling me about a specific class that you would have had at Temple University, which dealt with the ethics of journalism. And we talked about a couple of those principles that were part of the ethics that actually apply to everyone, no matter who they are. So tell me a little bit about a couple of those.
Well, there are a lot of values that would apply specifically to journalists, but there are also things we can apply to everyone. One of the most important being that you are responsible for the accuracy of your work.
Yep.
And so if you're saying all sorts of things without actually knowing if it's accurate or not, that's not going to be blamed on anyone else. And it's up to you to make sure that that's accurate.
Let me just comment on that one there as well. I love the idea. I love the word responsibility because that is something that seems to be lacking, where people put false information out there, or they even pass false information on, and it's almost as though they neglect the area of responsibility of taking responsibility for that education. So I serve in the local school board here, and we're all kind of distressed about some of the things that are happening, with kids either not in school full time or how that's happening, and everybody's got opinions. And I was talking to one of our fellow board members, and said something like this: like we have our own opinions. Like we would have things that we can say, but we have an opinion plus a responsibility. And that whole idea of responsibility really reframes everything and enables us to be more careful about what you say, because you actually have a responsibility for the effects of what you say. That's very significant.
Definitely.
You talked to me a little bit about part of that ethics is being aware of your own bias. Mm-hmm. So are there any unbiased human beings in media?
It's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible. Are there any unbiased human beings? No.
No.
No. So the way that applies to journalism and even how we manage news and so forth is we have to be careful that we don't just simply get the news that we want. How do you say, I'm going to read some things, or I'm actually going to listen to some things with an open mind of those things that I actually can say I disagree with, but I still may either learn something, or I may at least learn about a perspective, even if at the very end I am still coming to a place of disagreement. So, would there be pointers about how people can actually do that?
I mean, the way you could apply that to the ethics of journalism would be, if you're writing a story and you get one side, you are responsible, again, for finding that other side. If you simply stick with the first story that you heard and you don't find the other side, that's a slant and that's a bias. And so journalists are always taught to find both sides, and that can be something we do ourselves. If you see an article on Facebook, for example, which is not the best place to get your news.
No, that's putting it lightly.
If you see something that seems outlandish, it's very, very helpful to go hunting for the other side of that story, if there is one.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, when you look at a newspaper or whatever newspaper or a specific website that's media and news, it's easy to recognize, there's clear choices about what news is reported, even though it's completely clear and honest. There's still the choices of we report this but don't report this. It happens, so I find that actually very interesting. So I get most of my news by checking some websites online, and so I will read the local newspaper, Lancaster newspaper, and then online I will take a look at Fox News. I'll take a look at the New York Times. I'll take a look at the BBC. Because it's interesting for me, when it comes to the BBC, it's interesting to see what they're reporting from outside the United States. And then this last one may really throw people off, but I oftentimes will look at Al Jazeera. And the reason, the same thing again, is that there's news being reported outside the country that we're not getting through our local outlets. But also, it's interesting to see how they report on news. So I'm not saying I believe everything that they say and so forth or buy into it, but it enables me to get a different perspective or see things differently, even if I still, in the end up disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
You mentioned Facebook, and I'm, that's one. We could talk about all social media, Instagram. You don't generally share things or advance things on Instagram, but Twitter, you retweet things. So you mentioned the whole idea about knowing your source. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to pushing information on, that's one thing that I would say is pretty significantly lacking. Look, somebody agreed, so I'm going to pass it on, not knowing whether it's true. So when it comes to something like that, how would you advise someone to check the source?
I mean, most reputable news organizations are probably the best way to go. Even within that, they do have a code of ethics that's generally public. So they will, most likely, if they're advocacy journalists, they will say that they're purposely writing with a bias. And so even just to research the publication that you are getting your news from, where they're coming from, what their set of values is, that's huge, because it's not the same for everyone.
That's especially huge. I want to actually just reflect on that just a little bit here. So journalism is not just journalism. There's different kinds of journalism. So there is specific purpose behind the journalism that you read or see or whatever that framework is. And so it's very important that you know what that is. So you've said that there's something called advocacy journalism. So in other words, they're trying to make a point, and really the framework from which they make a decision about what they report is based upon, does this support what we're advocating for? So that's huge. I don't know if you have an opinion about what percentage of journalism is actually advocacy journalism.
I honestly don't know. I mean, it feels like it's becoming more and more prevalent. Yes, it sells more to have a very specific stream of thought.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of at the point in our world where you choose what you want to believe, unfortunately. And yeah, most publications would swing one way very far.
Yeah, that's very interesting to consider. I don't know the answer to that question either, and I wouldn't expect that any of us could really know that without some significant study. But when you think about what advocacy journalism is, where you're seeing everything that's being seen through, this is what I'm advocating for. So it's not unbiased reporting at all. And I'm a bit concerned that we're actually losing that aspect of unbiased reporting for the sake of advocacy reporting. And so for me, I would actually want to dig in a little bit more to say, okay, what is the code of conduct? What's the code of ethics that's there behind this media stream that can give me a little bit? So are people that clear when they say we are advocacy journalists? Does it actually say that oftentimes in a code of ethics for a specific newspaper or media outlet?
Maybe smaller ones. The big ones, I don't think they would say it that clearly. No.
Interesting.
But
so we have to be wise and discerning that if we're reading a newspaper or getting our information from a certain site, and you get a sense that, hey, pretty much they're neglecting certain news but constantly putting this other stuff out, that we have to be aware of that they're probably advocacy journalists.
Yeah. I mean, I think a huge tell would be the one side of the story thing. So if you're reading a newspaper article and you only get one side of the story, you don't see them approaching anyone else involved, that's probably a good sign.
Something to be careful about.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a guy that we talked about, I forget the man's name, but he was from the 1800s, but he was a pretty significant publisher in the United States, and he had a very specific creed about how they would report. So what was that?
Yeah. It was longer than this, but my favorite part of that paragraph is that we are meant to report without fear or favor. So we're not reporting because someone's pushing us, because someone's threatening us, and we're also not reporting because someone's paying us or giving us other perks. It's the essence of journalism, and maybe where it was supposed to have started or where it's supposed to be now is it's unbiased, it's truthful, you know your source, you don't embellish things, you don't lead people to specific ideas. It's just, we're meant to be the watchdogs of the nation and hold those in power accountable. And that's what it's meant to be. When
you define it that way, I feel like, wow, that's not what most of that is. It seems like that's the case. Yeah. Very, very insightful. And I would hope that for all of us, both as we all have a media platform, as well as we look at media, one of the things I've noticed, Hannah, is that the title of the article is so incredibly leading. I wonder how many people actually read an article where you kind of glance through down through and you see titles and you come to conclusions based upon a title without reading the content. Mm-hmm. And I can remember, I won't go into the details of this, but I remember a very specific hot button story that was being reported across the United States. And so on purpose, I went to one website to read how they reported about it and went to a different site to read how they reported about it. And what I discovered in doing that was the bulk of the article was the same. The only thing that was different was the title and the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Because they were trying to frame something. Either they realized people wouldn't read more than that, or they were trying to frame how you would see the rest of it.
Yeah. If any of you have a Planet Fitness membership or go to a gym, a great way to look for this example is to just watch the row of TVs. You might see the same news story presented by different publications, and the headlines are very, very, very different. Wow. That's just a very easy way to see it.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Because most people don't have multiple TVs in their house right next to each other.
Right.
That's
yes,
true.
that would be
the case.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, let me just say a couple things. First of all, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Thanks Hannah for coming. You did very, very well. I'm not sure what you were kind of nervous about.
Well, I mean, I didn't go into broadcast journalism for a reason. So.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
But
no, it went very well. Thanks very much for the insight that you had. And even as we prepare for this coming weekend, This coming weekend at Effort Community Church, we're stepping outside of the Faith Works series, and I have a message coming up this weekend called Life After Tuesday, because the following Tuesday is actually Election Day, and I know people have a certain level of anxiety about what life is like, and so what we're going to be focused on this coming weekend is those things that will not change. So even as we face a future that people are uncertain about what's going to happen on Tuesday and beyond Tuesday, what we're going to be focusing about is, hey, God is the same, and he's called us to do the same thing on Monday as he did on Tuesday and on Wednesday. And those are the things that we can be rooted in. And so my hope and desire for this weekend is that you're encouraged by the message and you leave this place confident and hopeful in what God has for us. And so until then, we'll look forward to seeing you on Saturday at 6 p.m. or Sunday morning at 8:30 or 10:30 or online at any of those times. And we trust that you'll have a great rest of your week. Thanks again for joining us.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening and that you'll join us again next week. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us by visiting effortcommunitychurch.com.